problem 18. 18 reads, travel by plane is a normal good and people's income increases. Simultaneously, the price of jet fuel rises. As a result, the equilibrium price of travel by plane blank and the equilibrium quantity blank. So here we have two different factors that are going to affect the quantity and price of traveling by plane. The first factor is people's income increasing, and the second factor is the price of jet fuel rising. Now these two factors affect both the supply and demand curves. The increase in people's income affects the supply curve. The increase in jet fuel affects the demand. The rise in people's income affects the demand curve. The rise in jet fuel prices affects the supply curve. So we have another one of those situations where you're going to have to make two separate graphs, because it doesn't tell you which effect is larger than the other. It doesn't tell you whether the demand or the supply curve are going to be affected more than the other. You don't know, so you have to do the two graphs to figure out what you do know. So let's start off with a original graph. This is going to be, and this is for travel by plane, because that is what we're trying to figure out. Now, first we have to figure out what are the effects based on the factors. So if travel by plane is a normal good and people's incomes increase, we know that the demand is going to increase. Whenever people's incomes increase, the demand for normal goods goes up. Whenever people's incomes decrease, the demand for normal goods falls. So we know the demand is going to go up. The price of jet fuel rises. That translates into a cost of doing business, into a cost of producing. If you're in the plane industry, you're the firm that is, if you're American Airlines and jet fuel prices go up, the cost of doing business is going to go up. And whenever the cost of doing business goes up, the supply drops. So we know that the effect of these two factors is going to be that the demand is going to increase and the supply is going to decrease. Again, we don't know which effect is larger than the other, so we have to do our two graph So again, to remind you of the process here, whenever we have the two factors that we don't know which one's bigger than the other, we have to figure out if we can even determine an effect on quantity or price. We have to do two graphs, and in one graph we're going to exaggerate the effect of one of the factors and minimize the effect of the other, and then we switch it up and do the opposite for the second graph. So maybe it becomes a little more clear once you see it done. Demand goes up. We'll make this one the exaggerated effect. So demand's going to go up by a lot. I'm going to say this is the new demand. And supply goes down. So we increase the demand, we decrease the supply just by a little tiny bit. And what we have is we have an increasing price, an increasing quantity. On the second one, we're going to do the exact opposite. We're going to exaggerate the supply and minimize the demand. So the supply is going to go down by a whole lot. Let me put that right there. And the demand is going to increase by just a tiny bit. This is the new point, and here the price went up and the quantity decreased. And that's exactly why we do this two-step process, because you see, depending on which factor is the largest one, which factor affects larger than the other, you're going to have two different outcomes for quantity. The quantity is going to increase here if the demand increases by a lot. The quantity is going to decrease here if the supply decrease. The quantity is going to increase a lot here if the demand increases by a lot and the supply only drops a little bit. The quantity is going to actually decrease here if the supply falls by a lot, but the demand increases just by a little bit. But what we do have in both cases is the price rising. That's the same in both cases. So we can say confidently that the price will definitely rise regardless of which factor is bigger than the other. But we don't know what's going to happen to the quantity. So the answer to the question is going to be C. The price of travel by plane rises and the equilibrium quantity might change, but more information is needed to determine if it increases, decreases, or does not change. So the answer is C.